The Toyota FJ Cruiser was sold in the US between the 2007 and 2014 model years, although it is still being sold as a new truck in certain markets outside of both the US and Japan. It's the Japanese Jeep in more ways than one, and today I'm going to drive it and discuss some of its history as well as why I maybe see this nameplate making a return in the future. Also, this particular truck is certainly put to work, and if it's a little dirty, that's because its owner has been out there battling the elements and has just squeezed in a little bit of time for me to make this video. This is a 2014 Toyota FJ Cruiser, and it's a polarizing truck to say the least. As a kid, I wasn't so fond of its looks, but in recent years, the FJ Cruisers have grown on me a little bit. Now, if my new infatuation isn't based on the general truck craze or overlanding craze of the present day, it's also partially based on the looks. I wasn't a really big fan of that kind of launch blue with the white roof. Actually, most of these came with the white roof, I think, till the very, very end. And I didn't like that contrast and the styling in general too much. But once some people color match the roof, and or in an example like this where it's all matte white, I kind of like the look a bit more. Now I digress. The FJ Cruiser, and in fact this last model year example right here, 2014 FJ Cruiser, started life at just over $33,000, but could easily creep into that low $40,000 range depending on the equipment. I don't have the sticker on this particular car, but my eyes and some research tells me that this is probably a more or less closer to base car. 6-speed manual, you don't have any sort of screen here, any sort of sound system, anything. This is just about as base as a 2014 got. There was a couple limited edition packages available in 2014 as compared to this car. But base or not, this truck does have, as I just mentioned, a manual transmission, and it's a lovely, lovely touch in a truck like this. It adds even more character to the already character-filled driving experience of an FJ Cruiser. The FJ Cruiser is powered by a naturally aspirated 4-liter 6-cylinder engine, producing a very average 260 horsepower and 271 pound-feet of torque. Although it's the exact same power plant that you would find today in a brand new 2021 4Runner. So all FJ Cruisers naturally came with knobby off-road tires and beadlock style wheels. This truck looks to have aftermarket wheels, but similar sized tires to what you'd find standard. The car, of course, comes with 4-wheel drive, but something to note, and something that's a bit strange, is that the manual cars, which I did already mention is standard, don't really come with a traditional transfer case. They come with like a center diff, which effectively leaves the truck in a forever 4-wheel drive mode, basically an all-wheel drive mode. There isn't really a way to decouple that and go into permanent rear-wheel drive mode, which is possible, of course, in the automatic FJ Cruisers and in almost any other, rock crawler all-wheel drive truck, Jeep Wrangler, for instance. It's definitely strange, and it does cause you to take a slight hit with fuel economy, but it's not like this truck was going to do great in the sense of fuel economy anyway, and you get a 6th overdrive gear at least in the manual, and you don't get that in the automatic. But on top of being a non-cost option, which again, for the 5th time, the manual transmission was on the FJ Cruisers, all the manual FJ Cruisers came standard with a rear locking differential, lockers, baby, which is not the case for the automatic. It was an optional, a pretty inexpensive optional extra, but the point is, if you're looking at an FJ Cruiser and if it's a manual, it automatically has the rear locking differential, perfect for a little off-roading. Now let's get the FJ Cruiser onto the road and discuss even more. So setting off here in the FJ Cruiser, you're immediately hit with this truck's classic body-on-frame driving dynamics. Vague and loose steering, a decently heavy clutch, but more notably a very long pedal travel, as well as a really, really vague shifter feel. The shifter moves a tremendous amount even when it's in gear. It may be the fact that this needs a new bushing. It is obviously not a brand new truck, but it's interesting to be able to move a shifter as much in gear as you usually are able to while in neutral in a sportier manual transmission vehicle. I think all of it just adds a bit to the charm of a Jeep-like truck like this. Of course, this transmission doesn't come with any of the modern manual transmission gimmicks that some of us are used to and some of us love, like hill start assist, auto rev matching, none of that. But I have to admit, it's a pretty easy manual transmission to adapt to. Doesn't take more than about a couple minutes to get used to the engagement point of the clutch, and even though the shifter is pretty vague, this isn't an overwhelming car to drive. It's not very fast. It's not demanding or asking too much of you. So as long as you're cruising along, putting along, you can definitely operate this vehicle pretty easily. Now, speaking of not having modern technology, despite being a 2014 model, this FJ Cruiser still has a rear view camera that's integrated into the rear view mirror. So it's a little tiny LCD hidden up there. You know, I'll be honest, it's nice that it has a camera at all. I sure know that many Jeep Wranglers from this era or from the early 2010s didn't even have any cameras. I don't even know if it was standard in this, but the point is the fact that this has it is nice. It's just that you don't have a tremendous amount of rearward visibility in this truck due to that large spare tire in the back, and having only a little tiny camera doesn't immensely aid in that. Now, speaking of overall visibility, yes, that rear view, or that the rear view window is largely covered by that spare tire, and unfortunately you have massive C-pillars on the side creating a big blind spot for you, and the mirrors only partially aid that. They're very tall, but they're not wide enough to offer you enough horizontal viewing angle out the rear. They do, however, have a really cool little spotlight on them on the front side of the mirrors, which I think is one of the neat little touches and quirks of the FJ Cruiser. Now, I do have to mention that I'm super immediately pleased by the utilitarian aspect of this truck. I kind of feel like I can conquer anything on the road right now. I feel like I can go off-roading, go to the beach, go to the snow, go wherever I need to. And that's a nice sensation, right? It's not a incredibly pleasing truck to drive in the sense of driving dynamics, but it feels like an old school truck in all the right ways. And I think there is obviously an infatuation or a desire within the market right now to have an overlanding off-road style truck that kind of feels like a truck. I know some of the new, no one's driven the new Bronco, but I know the new JL Wranglers drive much nicer than both this and the JK Wranglers, but this, again, much like a JK Wrangler, like a last generation Wrangler, feels like a proper truck, and there's really no way to avoid that or escape that. Now, speaking of the Jeep Wrangler, let's discuss the Jeep aspect of the FJ Cruiser. Now, the name FJ, so the F stands for gas, petrol engine, and if it was a B, it would stand for a diesel engine. Now, none of these modern FJ Cruisers came with the diesel, so there were no BJ Cruisers, as hilarious of a name as that would have been. There were only FJ Cruisers, but the J part of the name stands for Jeep, believe it or not. So this is effectively Toyota's version of a gas Jeep. Now, this all comes because in the 1950s, Toyota wanted to compete with the Willys CJ, the civilian Jeep, and they eventually came out with the FJ25, which did exactly that, right? It's Toyota's or Japan's version of a Jeep for the civilian, for the common man to enjoy. And I think that there's a lot of merit in that, right? The competition there in the golden era of America from Japan, and that's held true even till today with the products that brands like Toyota are still putting out now, and this car kind of included. And so that line eventually turned into the FJ40, the FJ60, which became the Land Cruiser line, and that gained a ton of prominence. Now, the thing is, by the time the FJ60 came around in 1980, the direction of these civilian Jeeps had kind of gone more towards rugged SUV and away from true Jeep-like characteristics. And while that still exists today, although the Land Cruiser itself is having its life maybe cut short here in the US, I think what happened was there was really nobody left come the mid-1980s making Jeep-style trucks except for AMC and then subsequently Chrysler, continuing to make then what became the Jeep Wrangler, which we obviously still have today. Now, I'd be remiss to not mention the Ford Bronco and the Chevy Blazer, which both came out in the 1960s and kind of combined the more civilian nature of an SUV along with a bit of that utilitarian nature of the FJs and the Jeeps of the era. All those trucks had large success back then and slowly but surely faded away, unfortunately. Now what's happened since then is we've had a lot of ups and downs in the desire of SUVs, or trucks if you will. Gas prices have certainly affected that. Things like the 2008 US recession affected that. But we're in a precarious place now where there are more efficient ways to give somebody a larger vehicle, such as, of course, the EV route, but also more efficient uses of motors. Not that this car is a great example of it. And there's once again a major desire for large trucks. So we have a rough history of where this FJ Cruiser comes from, and now let's discuss what this truck is and was in the late 2000s or early 2010s. So the modern FJ Cruiser features many of the design elements that originally made the FJ line famous. It does it in a bit of a funky retro way, but in retrospect, the styling of this truck is a little bit more compelling than a young Rio thought. The front end, at least in my opinion, certainly works a bit better than the rear end. You get a very old school style headlight and turn signal unit, and you get a grille that almost completely matches or is identical to the original FJ25s and FJ40s, which is really cool. On top of that, you have a very straight up and vertical flat windshield. It's not quite as dramatically flat as a Jeep Wrangler or say a Mercedes G-Wagon, but it certainly does feel very upright as compared to most cars you'd experience or encounter. The rear is where I kind of wish we would have gotten a bit more of that clean and semi-upright, flat style of the older trucks. Instead, we get this funky, hodgepodgey style of partially modern, partially retro, and it looks gimmicky in the same ways that, to me, a Thunderbird looks gimmicky or looked gimmicky. It works a bit better in this particular car that gets that crazy blacked out treatment that the owner of this truck has put on. Now, classically, you get a white colored roof panel, and that's true of this truck, which is originally black and has that white roof, although this car has been wrapped in a matte white finish, which both helps protect this car from some of the elements that this driver exposes it to, as well as giving you a bit of a cleaner look again alongside and paired with those blacked out headlight and taillight elements. Now, the interior is exactly what you'd expect from a Jeep-like truck like the FJ Cruiser, which is that it's a place and a space meant for people and things, and there's very little to no fluff beyond that. Now, what I immediately noticed is it's a bit difficult to get into the rear due to the weird suicide doors. They're not, I mean, I don't want to say they're weird, but I think in theory, a proper four-door version of this truck probably would have been appreciated a bit more than having suicide doors. Although, again, it also adds a bit to the charm of this truck. And in fact, these kind of suicide doors are very similar to what you'd find in a truck, like a shorter cab Tacoma, for instance. So you get pros and cons there, but getting into the rear isn't the easiest. Now, the rear, the space itself is all right. There isn't a crazy amount of legroom, again, because of the slightly shorter wheelbase of this truck. But I will say the weakest point of that rear bench is its width. You don't have a tremendous amount of hip room, so fitting 5 adults in this truck isn't the most comfortable experience, and it's kind of not what you'd expect from a larger vehicle like this, although again, the wheelbase is a bit shorter and it's not a outrageously large truck. So you get a decent amount of space in the trunk behind the second row. It's because the bench is closer up than you'd like in the sense of legroom, but then you get space behind it. Now, there are a few cool gimmicks that remind me once again just how utilitarian this truck is. The first of those gimmicks is there's a trio of pods here on the dashboard, and the first one on the far left is a compass. In the center you have your outside temperature, and on the far right you have a gyroscope, which helps let you know I guess they call it your yaw and something. I always forget what it's called, but it helps let you know the angle at which your truck's at if you're doing extreme off-roading, rock crawling, and sometimes it's hard to perceive that while you're inside the vehicle itself. The second thing right next to it is a hidden little cubby up here in the dash. Another cool place. It's actually right above your gauge cluster, and it's a cool place to hide a few things that you want to keep out of sight and not leave up on your dashboard. Also to keep them secure for either, I guess, highway driving, but more or less, again, for off-roading, to not let them fall all over the place or all over the cabin. The next cool little feature is you have a clutch start cancel button, which effectively allows this car to start moving forward without needing to use the clutch pedal. I believe it's intended to be used in extremely challenging and difficult off-roading situations. I guess all of these things keep circling back to off-roading, right? It is an off-road vehicle. So this button effectively allows you in LL mode, which is your low range mode, to be able to press it and then just start, I guess, press the gas pedal and not need to use the clutch. That's the understanding I have it. I've never used it, and I can't imagine it's an incredibly smart idea to use it very frequently, but it is a cool feature, first of all, and second of all, just reminds you again of the utilitarian aspect of the truck. Now, the last cool feature to me is one of those little things that you might not notice until you get to really live with this truck. So my buddy who owns it told me about it, and he loves it, which is that the tailgate, which already does happen to have a window that perfectly is cut out to clear that spare tire, so you can open it without needing to, or you can, throw things into the trunk without needing to open the entire tailgate, something that Jeep should learn from, is that you can actually lock the tailgate in place. So whether you're experiencing a strong wind or whether you're dealing with a very uneven surface, you are able to definitely keep that tailgate locked in position so it's not swinging back and hitting you while you're doing anything off-roady or overlandy at the back of your truck. So a really nice feature there. It definitely feels outdated in this cabin, especially considering 2014. I mean, yeah, it was 7 years ago, but it wasn't that long ago. It's just the fact that really this truck is more like 15 years old. Yeah, it's not a truck meant for obviously luxury, and it's also not a truck meant for cushy comfort. If you haven't gotten the big picture yet, it's a truck obviously meant for off-roading, and that's what its real capabilities are. Now, I would technically go show you guys that, but I'm sure there's plenty of content out there demonstrating just how capable these FJ Cruisers are off-road. They're real rugged prowess. But again, I'm just cruising here in the Malibu Canyons, something I typically do in a bit of a sportier car, but explaining why this has a very cool vibe to it. I will say that my favorite thing about this truck actually is all of the analog sensations you feel while driving it. It's been pared down and takes you right back to what I'm sure the 1960s and 70s, maybe 80s felt like, which is no BS, no gimmicks. Yeah, you have an audio player that has some Bluetooth and stuff, but other than that, the gauges are simple. There's not screens everywhere, and yeah, I mean, even the steering has a bit of a feel to it, although it's that loosey-goosey body-on-frame truck steering feel. But still, the point is, you get the sensations of the old school, the analog feeling, and even this little funky shifter here adds to that. Now, this is a great time to mention two things. One, yes, everything I've mentioned and just expressed that I love is great, but it's a lot more acceptable in what's expected to be a bit of an antiquated driving experience at this point, an older truck. This is still not a brand new truck you can buy today, at least not in the US market, and it's a little bit less acceptable to me in a brand spanking new 2021 4Runner. So and the price tag plays a role. So I guess the second thing I want to say is, how much can you get an FJ Cruiser for, right? Considering it's this antiquated and charming driving experience, is it a better deal than, say, a brand new 4Runner or even a 4Runner TRD Pro? Well, that largely depends on the condition and mileage of the truck. An abused and high mileage, poorly taken care of FJ Cruiser isn't going to be far north of about 10 grand, while an extremely well preserved, low mileage and maybe slightly and nicely modified FJ Cruiser can creep upwards of $50,000. That leaves me to feel like your best bet is probably to grab an FJ Cruiser somewhere in that mid-20s range, where you're still getting a decently preserved and taken care of truck, but obviously what you'd call a driver, meaning something you can take out and use the way it's meant to be used. I probably wouldn't want to pick up an extremely beat up truck, even though these can notoriously last quite a while in the sense of mileage, as a lot of these Toyota truck products can. Personally, I'd probably stick to a truck within that 100-ish thousand mile range, around 20, 25 grand. But it's a decent value for that money. The market, you know, is up, and these hold their values usually decently well if they're not abused, because people still want them, and you no longer can get them brand new, again, at least not here in the US, or even in Japan for that matter. Now, I want to discuss the future of the FJ Cruiser to conclude, but the owner of this truck would be really mad at me if I don't do the standard and obligatory tall boy test. So let's see if the FJ Cruiser is utilitarian enough to party. So without further ado, here we go. There seems to be real hope for the return of an FJ Cruiser. The classic Jeep has never really gone away. The Ford Bronco is slated to make its return anytime now. Land Rover just released a new generation of Defender, and even Chevrolet released a new Blazer. Okay, well, the Blazer was a major flop and not a proper SUV, but the point is there seems to be a real desire and appetite for proper body-on-frame trucks like these that, yes, in the modern day, and meaning literally right now, drive even nicer and more car-like than this does, but people want to feel all of those same general sensations. There is an all-new lineup of Toyota trucks coming out, including the Tundra, the Tacoma, and the 4Runner. I think the Tundra is just about to come out at the time of recording and probably out, or at least been unveiled, I should say, by the time you're watching this. So that leaves them some room to be simultaneously developing a new FJ Cruiser, and we'll see if it comes to fruition. But we kept hearing murmurs and whatever, rumors, I guess, of the Bronco for years, and then finally, bam, there it is. So the same thing may be true of this truck. I actually think I read somewhere that the head of Toyota's truck division was hinting at an internal desire at Toyota to bring the FJ back, or at least the idea that they themselves were aware of both the demand in the general market as well as the fact that their competition is putting out trucks that directly compete with the FJ Cruiser. So all of that gives us a lot of hope, but the truth is, obviously, nothing is for certain. So until something becomes more concrete, the good news is there are still plenty of FJ Cruisers varying from very poor condition to fantastic condition, and a large variance in price as well available on the market used. So if you're interested, obviously go pick one of those up, or at least try to go drive one and see what it's all about. These are very fun trucks, and they do have a certain charm to them that's almost more so appreciated today in retrospect than maybe it was in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12 compared to modern cars at the time. When you're in an FJ Cruiser, you get to enjoy the utilitarian capabilities and obviously the funky looks. If you guys enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. New videos are coming out every single week. Comment down below. Let me know what cars you guys want to see me try to review. I'm going to do my very best to make it happen. And as always, this is Rio.